Welcome to Midnight Confessions, where true horror stories come alive. Subscribe for spine-chilling tales that will haunt your nights. Share in the comments where you're watching from. Let's start the story. The darkness that consumed my family didn't announce itself with thunder or screams. It crept in silently, wearing the innocent face of a 9-year-old boy who would become our living nightmare. Growing up in the forgotten town of Millbrook, where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, I thought I knew what evil looked like. The crumbling Victorian houses, the cemetery that bordered our backyard, the way the wind howled through bare branches on moonless nights. But true horror, I learned, doesn't hide in abandoned places or ghost stories. It lives in your own home, sharing your dinner table, sleeping just down the hall. My name is Sarah, and I was 17 when the terror began. Our house sat at the edge of town like a wounded animal, surrounded by dying cornfields that rustled with secrets. My mother Elena worked night shifts at the psychiatric ward of Millbrook General Hospital, bringing home stories that would make your skin crawl. My father Marcus spent his days beneath broken cars at Thompson's auto shop, his hands permanently stained with oil that looked disturbingly like dried blood in the right light. For 13 years, it had been just us four. Me, my parents, and my younger brother Dylan, who possessed the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. Even as a toddler, Dylan never laughed like other children. His smiles were calculated, his stares unervingly intense, and he had this disturbing habit of watching people sleep. But blood is thicker than water, and I convinced myself his strange behavior was just Dylan being Dylan. Then came the announcement that would shatter our world forever. It was an October evening when the wind carried the scent of decay from the cornfields. Mom gathered us around our scarred wooden table, her hands trembling as she delivered news that felt like a death sentence in disguise. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the house's constant creaking. My fork clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like gunshots in the suffocating silence. You're serious?" I stammered, watching her pale face for signs this was some twisted joke. "Yes," she breathed, glancing at Dad, whose grip on her hand looked more like a lifeline than affection. "You're getting another sibling." A strange euphoria washed over me. Finally, someone to share the burden of this family's secrets. Someone who might understand the weight of living in a house where happiness came to die. "Mom, that's incredible news." But Dylan's reaction froze my blood solid. His young face contorted into something inhuman, his chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a coffin lid. "No," he hissed, his voice carrying a venom that no child should possess. "I want everything to stay exactly the same." "Dylan," Dad's voice wavered as he tried to maintain control. "Being a big brother is a gift. You'll see." The look Dylan gave us then still haunts my nightmares. His eyes went completely black, void of any human warmth. "I don't want gifts," he whispered with terrifying calm. "I want her gone." What followed were 9 months of psychological torture that would have broken weaker families. As Mom's belly grew, so did Dylan's hatred. He would stare at her stomach with the intensity of a predator studying its prey, whispering things I couldn't quite hear but that made my mother flinch and clutch her belly protectively. The night baby Rose was born, I felt hope pierce through the darkness for the first time in months. Holding her tiny, perfect form in the sterile hospital room, I whispered promises of protection that would soon be tested beyond imagination. Dylan stood in the corner like a shadow made flesh, his small hands clenched into fists. When Mom offered him a chance to hold his sister, his refusal came with such cold finality that the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I hate her," he stated matter-of-factly. "She shouldn't exist." The months that followed transformed our home into a house of horrors. Mom returned to her night shifts, leaving me as Rose's primary guardian during the dark hours. I treasured those moments, rocking her to sleep while humming lullabies that seemed to keep the shadows at bay. But Dylan watched. Always watching. His hatred manifested in increasingly disturbing ways. When Rose cried, he would smile. When she slept peacefully, he would hover over her crib with an expression that made my skin crawl. The night I caught him standing beside her bassinet at 3 a.m., just staring down at her sleeping form, I knew something terrible was building. "What are you doing?" I had whispered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the baby. He turned to me with those soulless eyes and smiled. "Waiting," he said simply. "Waiting for what?" "For the right moment." The summer everything changed arrived like a fever dream. Both parents had emergency shifts that couldn't be avoided, and our usual babysitter had mysteriously fallen ill. They had no choice but to leave me in charge of both Dylan and Rose for an entire afternoon. "Just until dinner," Mom said, but her kiss on my cheek felt like a goodbye. "Call if anything happens." Anything at all. The first hour passed in deceptive tranquility. Rose slept angelically in her crib upstairs while Dylan played with his action figures downstairs, arranging them in disturbing battle scenes that always ended in death. The house felt heavy with anticipation, like the air before a violent storm. Then Rose's screams shattered the silence. But these weren't normal cries. These were screams of pure terror, high-pitched wails that sounded like a soul being torn apart. I had never heard a baby make sounds like that. My blood turned to ice as I realized Dylan was no longer in the living room.
Dylan!
I screamed, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The sound of running water guided me to the bathroom, where a scene from my worst nightmares awaited. Rose lay in the bathtub, her tiny body writhing in agony as scalding water poured over her from the faucet above. Steam rose from her reddening skin like smoke from a funeral pyre.
And Dylan?
Dylan stood beside the tub like a young executioner, his hand controlling the temperature knob with surgical precision.
He wasn't hurried. He wasn't panicked.
He was savoring every second of her suffering.
Dylan, stop.
I lunged forward, yanking Rose from what could have been her grave, shutting off the demonic flow of burning water. Her screams pierced my soul as I wrapped her in towels, checking desperately for permanent damage. When I spun to face Dylan, expecting to see remorse or fear or even anger, I found something far more terrifying. He was smiling. Not the guilty grin of a child caught misbehaving, but the satisfied smirk of someone who had accomplished exactly what they set out to do. "You could have killed her," I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of horror.
His smile widened. "I know. She's just a baby.
She never did anything to you." "She exists," he said with the cold logic of a serial killer.
She stole my life.
She deserves to pay the price. You're sick. You're actually sick. He tilted his head like a curious predator. "And you're next if you try to stop me again." I held Rose closer, her tiny heart beating against my chest like a trapped bird. In that moment, I realized the true horror of our situation. We weren't living with a troubled child having difficulty adjusting to change. We were sharing our home with something that had learned to wear Dylan's face, something that wouldn't stop until it destroyed everything pure and innocent in our world. As I sat in the living room that evening, Rose still trembling in my arms, I knew that this was only the beginning. Dylan had shown me exactly who he really was, and the worst part? I was completely powerless to protect anyone from the monster who shared our name, our blood, and our home. The real question wasn't what Dylan had become. It was what he would do next, and whether any of us would survive long enough to find out. Some families have skeletons in their closets. Mine had a living nightmare sleeping just down the hall, counting down the days until he could finish what he started. And the most terrifying part? He was only 9 years old. He had years to perfect his craft.
Let's start the story.
The moment my parents stepped through the door, I spilled everything. My mom's face went pale, drained of every trace of warmth, as I described what I saw. My dad's eyes locked onto Ryan, disbelief twisting his expression. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the air. Ryan just stared back, his silence heavier than words.
"Ryan, answer me," my dad thundered.
Finally, Ryan whispered, his tone flat, unnerving, "I don't like her. I never will." My mother collapsed into tears, clutching Lily so tightly you'd think she was afraid he'd snatch her away. My dad's jaw clenched, his hand dragging down his face in frustration.
"That's it. He needs help."
The following week, they forced Ryan into therapy. The counselor said sibling jealousy was common, but I knew this wasn't normal. The way Ryan had looked that day, calm, satisfied, as Lily screamed in terror, is a memory that haunts me still. Years have passed, but the image refuses to fade. And sometimes when I visit home, I catch him at the dinner table, now a teenager. He'll glance at Lily, and that same faint smirk creeps across his lips. A smirk that makes my blood run cold, like he's hiding something darker waiting. I used to believe family was the one safe place, the bond you could always count on. I don't believe that anymore. I grew up in a small industrial town in southern Indiana, where steel mills and freight yards shaped not just the streets but the people themselves. The air smelled like iron, and tempers snapped like brittle glass. My father spent long shifts at the plant, while my mother worked endless nights as a nurse at the county hospital. That left me and my older brother, Kyle, to survive on our own. Kyle was only 3 years older, but he carried himself like he was decades ahead. Taller, broader, sharper in every way. He was everything I wasn't. I shadowed him constantly, desperate for his approval, desperate to belong. But most of the time, he shoved me aside. "Stop being my shadow," he'd sneer. Then Mary was born. I was 10, Kyle was 13. She was just a baby at first, another responsibility in a house already cracking under weight. But Mary was different. She had this radiant smile, pure and warm, a light that cut through the darkness.
For a while, even Kyle softened.
He would hold her when she cried, whispering strange little lullabies, almost tender. For a brief moment, we almost felt like a normal family. But we were never normal.
Not really.
Dad's drinking grew worse after the mills started cutting jobs. Mom lived in a fog of exhaustion, her body at home but her mind lost in fluorescent hospital corridors.
And Kyle.
Kyle absorbed it all.
The resentment.
The rage. By 16, he had developed the same cruel streak Dad carried when the whiskey took hold. He mocked me for my grades, for my scrawny frame, for not fitting in. Weak, he'd hiss, the same word Dad once hurled at him. And sometimes, when the air grew thick with tension, Kyle turned his venom on Mary. No bruises, nothing you could photograph, but his words cut deeper than fists. Still, I told myself it was just a phase. That time would blunt his edges. Deep down though, I knew better. By the spring of 1981, everything shattered. Dad collapsed from a heart attack at work, gone before the ambulance even arrived. Mom buried herself in double shifts, avoiding grief like it was contagious. That left me 17, and Kyle 20, to keep the house afloat. But Kyle had already dropped out of community college. He spent his days drinking in the basement, his nights with the aimless guys at the shuttered gas station. His life was slipping away, and with it, his sanity.
Then came Elma.
She wasn't just some girl.
She was mine first.
We met at the library, our hands brushing over the same book. For the first time, someone saw me, not my brother's shadow, not my father's failure me. But like everything else, Elma drifted into Kyle's orbit. His charm, rough and dangerous, pulled her in. And before I could stop it, she was his. He never even tried to hide the cruelty. I can still hear the venom in his voice that night I confronted him. Face it, little brother, she was never going to stay with a weakling like you. Those words weren't just insults. They tore something open inside me, something that never healed. It was April 1981.
Easter Sunday.
The day everything in my life snapped. Mom insisted we hold dinner at the house. It was tradition, she said. She just wanted something to feel normal again after Dad's death. Kyle showed up late, reeking of whiskey, Alma trailing behind him like a shadow. With them came her 2 kids from her last relationship, and Mary. 14 years old, fragile and quiet, yet her eyes always carried an unease that unsettled me. I sat in silence that afternoon, clutching a watered-down beer, while Kyle spent the day carving me apart piece by piece. My grades. My failures. My future. His voice was like acid, burning through whatever dignity I had left. Mom tried to defend me, but her words had no weight anymore. At one point, Kyle leaned in close, smirk curling his lips, and hissed so only I could hear, "Maybe if you were a man, Elma would have stayed with you.
But she chose right."
My hand trembled so hard the fork almost slipped. And Mary, her eyes flicked toward me, like she could sense the storm I was barely holding back. After dinner, the children ran outside to hunt for Easter eggs. The sun sank low, shadows stretching across the backyard like black claws. Inside, Mom and Elma cleared dishes while Kyle slouched back, grinning at me, like he'd won a war I didn't even know I was fighting. That's when something inside me broke for good. I left the table quietly, climbed upstairs, and opened the old wooden trunk at the foot of my bed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was Dad's .357 revolver. I hadn't touched it in years. That night, it felt alive in my hands, heavy with purpose. When I walked back down, I could hear laughter outside. Kyle stood in the kitchen pouring another drink. He looked up and sneered.
"What?
Finally gonna grow a backbone?" For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I raised the revolver. His smirk faltered. "What the hell are you doing?" he stammered. My voice was eerily calm, too calm. "You took everything from me." The thunder of the gunshot shattered the kitchen. Kyle's body slammed against the counter, blood painting the linoleum in violent strokes. Elma's scream ripped through the air, but it cut short when I turned the gun on her.
One shot. Silence.
Mom froze, a dish still in her hand. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Fear. Anger. Maybe pity. I'll never know which made me pull the trigger. The children rushed back inside, their laughter replaced by screams of pure horror. Mary's voice rose above them all. "Stop. Please stop." But I couldn't. My vision tunneled. My body wasn't mine anymore. The revolver roared again. And again. And again. Until there was nothing but silence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the ringing in my ears. When it was over, the house was soaked in blood. 11 lives erased. My family,
My tormentors. My constants. All gone.
I sat on the couch, revolver heavy in my lap, staring into the void. Hours passed like seconds before I picked up the phone. My voice was hollow when the dispatcher answered, "I killed them." The officers who arrived couldn't process the carnage. One vomited in the bushes. Another muttered under his breath, "Christ Almighty." I didn't resist when they cuffed me. The trial was a spectacle. Neighbors testified how quiet I had been, how unimaginable it was that I could do something so monstrous. The defense pleaded insanity, pointing to my depression, my isolation, my years of emotional abuse. But the jury knew the truth. This wasn't madness. This was rage. Cold, deliberate rage.
Guilty.
11 life sentences. No chance of parole. And now, decades later, I sit in a gray cell, my hands frail, my body rotting with age. I replay that night over and over. The screams, the blood, the silence. A true horror story that began with just a few cruel words, and ended with the destruction of everything.
Let's start the story.
I never thought babysitting my little sister would change my life forever. I was 14 when she was born, and with a 12-year gap between us, I had already grown used to being the only child. My parents hadn't planned for another baby. They called her a miracle, but I wasn't sure how to feel at first. I had always been the center of attention, the one they bragged about, the one whose drawings filled the fridge. But when Nora arrived, everything shifted. She was so small, so breakable, and the way she clung to me when I held her awakened something protective in me. By the time she turned 2, I wasn't just her older brother, I was her babysitter most nights. My parents worked long shifts, Dad at the fire station, Mom in the ER, so evenings were often mine to handle.
I didn't mind.
Nora was funny, sweet, and just learning to talk in her squeaky little voice. But then, the strange things began. It started on a Thursday evening. We were in the living room, her cross-legged on the couch, blanket in her lap, eyes glued to her cartoon. I scrolled through my phone when she tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Hungry, hungry." Smiling, I tucked away my phone. "All right, kiddo, let's get dinner." I stepped into the kitchen, pulling out pasta, when her scream ripped through the air. It wasn't a child's cry, it was a raw, blood-curdling scream that froze my veins. I dropped the box and ran back. She was on the couch, trembling, eyes wide with terror.
Nora.
"What's wrong?" I asked, scanning the room for an intruder.
Then, her expression changed.
Her face twisted into a grin that didn't belong to her. In a voice clear and perfect, too perfect for a 2-year-old, she said, "I got you." I froze. Her speech had always been broken, toddler-like. But that sentence was sharp, deliberate, almost rehearsed. My laugh came out strained as I ruffled her hair. "You nearly gave me a heart attack, squirt." But deep inside, unease coiled in my chest. Days later, it happened again. I was chopping vegetables when she padded into the kitchen, dragging her stuffed rabbit.
"Danny," she whispered. My head snapped. "What?"
"My name isn't Danny.
"It's Mateo."
She pointed down the shadowy hallway. "The man says Danny." The knife trembled in my hand. Every hair on my body stood on end. Slowly, I turned toward the hall. It was swallowed in shadows, doors closed, silence heavy. I forced myself to check, heart hammering as I peeked inside each room. Nothing. No one. When I returned, Nora was smiling again. That same unsettling, satisfied smile. After that, things only got worse. She'd stop playing with her blocks, stare at the wall, and whisper, "Baby on the wall." Other times, she laughed, not the innocent giggle of a toddler, but a deep, mocking laugh that sounded too old for her little body. The worst night was at 3 a.m. I was studying when I heard her crying. I crept into her room. The nightlight painted the walls in a dull orange glow. She was pointing at her closet. "The man is in the closet." The door was half open, the darkness inside so black it felt alive. Every instinct screamed not to look. I scooped her into my arms instead. "You're sleeping in my room tonight," I whispered. But as I carried her out, she leaned into my ear and whispered, crystal clear, "I want to stay with the man." My stomach dropped. She was only 2. She couldn't form sentences like that, except when she talked about him. My parents brushed it off. "Kids say weird things," Dad chuckled. Mom patted my shoulder, telling me not to scare myself. But it didn't feel like imagination anymore. Not when she laughed during movies at the wrong parts. Dark, cruel laughs. Not when she looked disappointed when characters survived instead of died. And always, always, there was the man. The last night I babysat her, everything broke. Around midnight, Nora had fallen asleep on the couch. I carried her upstairs, tucked her in, and started down the stairs when I heard it. The laugh. Low, layered, like something ancient laughing with her. Mateo, her voice floated down the stairs.
I turned.
She was standing at the top, out of her crib, eyes glassy, a smile stretched too wide across her tiny face. The man says, "Come play." The hallways seemed to grow darker, heavier, the air suffocating. And then I saw it, in the corner beyond the light.
A figure. Tall. Still. Watching. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe.
And then Nora blinked, rubbed her eyes, and mumbled in her broken toddler voice again, "Hungry."
The figure vanished.
I never told my parents what I saw. Maybe it was fear, maybe sleep deprivation, but part of me knows it wasn't. Nora is older now, 4 years old. She doesn't mention the man anymore. But some nights when I pass her room, I hear her whispering.
Not baby talk. Not clear words. Something in between. And sometimes,
I swear I hear another voice whispering back. If these stories kept you awake tonight, imagine what the next one will do. Subscribe to Midnight Confessions, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if this happened to you? Your nightmares are just beginning.